First is this wild moment for racer-turned-commentator Martin Brundle. The 1996 drivers were getting ready for their first Grand Prix of the year at the Albert Park circuit, which was also F1's first time visiting this track. But for Martin Brundle, this excitement was short-lived after this monster crash at Turn 3. He drove into the back of another car, and his Jordan Peugeot got launched dramatically into the air. He flew over a McLaren and flipped upside down immediately. The Jordan slid into the gravel trap on its rollover hoop and dug into the ground in a very nasty crash. The car literally split in two and folded over on top of itself, showing just how fragile these cars really were.
Wow, that's one of the Jordans! This is what we feared at this corner, and that looks very nasty indeed.
First up is this awful moment for Jerry Yeoman in what is definitely one of the most intense crashes in drag racing history. He suffered this huge crash in 2001 at the Wichita International Raceway, where he experienced a horrible barrel roll just moments after starting his run. He was racing Jim Wiens in the Pro Mod final of the Wichita Summer Nationals. The naturally aspirated Pontiac that Jerry was driving veered left violently at the 1/8 mile marker, and at this moment there was no coming back. It sent the car over the barrier, where it exploded in a ball of flames and rolled over a dozen times before coming to a stop at the quarter-mile mark. It's a complete miracle that he survived that one, if you ask me. First up was one of the absolute craziest crashes that F2 has ever seen. The young Venezuelan EJ Visor was taken for the ride of his life in this horrific flip in 2007. He was involved in a close battle mid-pack at the start of the GP2 race and was attempting to jump a few of his opponents early. But this isn't what he had in mind when he thought about jumping other cars. He attempted to overtake Michael Ammermüller while traveling at insane speed down the back straight, but as he did, he clipped the back of Ammermüller, sending him airborne immediately. He flew to a crazy height, flipped mid-air, rolled off the ground, and smashed the concrete wall at a horrible angle. He skated down the wall at high speed, ripping his car up in the process and narrowly missing the marshals who were standing behind the wall. Somehow Viso survived this horror shunt, but his car, well, it wasn't just as lucky.
Oh, and another one! We are going to see a red flag, and that is a huge accident. That's Javier Villa, I think. And he's taken the top off a water supply.
While talking about high-speed crashes, it'd be wrong not to mention this completely terrifying moment from Berngrennen Oberhallau in 2023. The event always draws a good crowd thanks to its ambitious drivers and exciting stages, but last year this moment completely stole the show. All that could be seen was a wheel flying through the air and a bunch of onlookers fearing the worst. The aftermath was brutal too, and it's not one the driver will forget anytime soon. First on our list is a moment from 2018 that shook the entire world, and that's no exaggeration. The crash was so bad it made news stations that usually don't even cover motorsport, but when you see the crash, you'll see why. 17-year-old Sophia Flörsch was racing in the infamous Macau Grand Prix, known for hosting F3 every year. The streets are incredibly tight, and danger is around every single corner, but unluckily for Sophia, she went off in the worst possible place on the whole track. She hit another car and couldn't slow down, sending her into the path of a badly placed curb. At 170 miles per hour, her car launched into the air and flew straight over the other cars on track. It went so high, it completely missed the crash barrier and went headfirst into the fence with a horrific thud. The crash happened so fast that it was hard to see, but what was obvious was that the car got mangled in the fence at a brutal angle. She won't forget that one anytime soon. This horrible smash happened at the 1999 British Grand Prix for none other than Michael Schumacher. The German was a two-time world champion already at this stage. He was racing for Ferrari around Silverstone when he had what was probably the worst crash of his entire F1 career. On the first lap, he was battling with teammate Eddie Irvine down the high-speed hangar straight. At the worst possible moment, when Schumacher was flat out, the rear brakes failed on his Ferrari F399, and he was sent straight into the tyre barrier at high speed. He broke his leg in the crash and had to miss 6 races that year, hurting his chance to fight for the title. But he was lucky to come back at all after this horror shunt.
The German's late on the brakes, locking up across the gravel, and that's a very heavy impact into the tyre barrier.
When you increase the speed, the danger usually increases too. Just ask Steve Torrence. The Texan was the top fuel points leader when he entered this second round of eliminations in 2017 in Dallas. His run had gone well, and he beat his competitor Richie Crampton. But just as Steve crossed the finish line, his dragster lost control at over 300 miles per hour. As his rear left tire failed, the engine exploded dramatically and the car smashed the concrete wall extremely hard. It quite literally split in half before veering across the track and hitting the concrete wall, pretty much every driver's worst nightmare. During the thrilling 2011 Spa-Francorchamps GP2 race, drivers were on edge, as always at the terrifying track. The crazy high-speed circuit is known to be one of the most feared in the world, and in this race we were reminded why. Fabio Lima was involved in an awful accident that shocked the motorsport community. Lima was driving through the famous Raidillon corner just after Eau Rouge, and out of nowhere, disaster struck for the young Swiss driver. He swerved sharply off track as his car snapped out of control in the worst possible place on the entire track. His car went headfirst towards the wall and hit it at incredible speed in a devastating accident. The barrier and his car were severely damaged, with his GP2 machine left in a twisted wreck due to the devastating impact. As it bounced back onto the tarmac, the true extent of the damage could be seen. As rescue personnel raced to the site, onlookers held their breath. Lima miraculously came out unscathed, a credit to modern safety standards. It didn't put him off either, as he eventually became GP2 champion in 2013. This next crash is so outrageous and happened so fast that it's hard to even tell what type of car it is, but I do know that it's one of the craziest incidents I've ever seen in rallying. The car was coming down a narrow road at top speed and completely went off the tarmac at one of the worst possible points. Another amazing airborne moment happened just 1 year later, this time at the Monza circuit in Italy. Alexander Peroni was driving for Campos Racing in the first race of the weekend when his life flashed before his eyes. During the race, he went wide at the Parabolica corner and, unluckily for him, came across a broken piece of sausage curb on the outside of the track. He hit it at full speed and it launched him into the air at an incredible angle, somersaulting mid-air and landing him on top of the barrier and into the fence.
I think we now can show you what happened to Alex Peroni. Oh my goodness me. That is a horrific sight. Very serious crash for Alexander Peroni into the fence.
It was unlike any other crash in F3 history, but he was extremely lucky to not land on his head, with the crash barrier missing it by mere centimeters. Come on, Alex, when your engineer asked for a flying lap, that's not what he meant. Another Ferrari driver who had a massive crash in red was Kimi Räikkönen, and it happened to be at the exact same track. The Finn was deep in the action on the opening lap of the 2014 British Grand Prix when he ended up in the wall. He was going through the left-handed Aintree corner when he had a massive snap. The F14T wasn't exactly known for its good handling, and it definitely didn't do Kimi any favors here. He couldn't regain control of the car as it flicked left and right at extremely high speed, and he was thrown straight into the wall under the bridge and suffered a monumental impact. The car was flung across the track and smashed into 2 other cars before hitting the wall on the other side of the tarmac. Another popular side of drag racing is when modified street supercars battle each other on the strip. And while it's entertaining, it's not what these machines are truly built for, so accidents are far from uncommon. Take this Audi R8 as an example. It was likely producing well over 1,500 brake horsepower, and when the driver tried to use all of it, well, the car didn't respond kindly. It started losing control almost straight away, sliding all across the track, and before the driver knew it, things got completely out of hand. It kicked left and sent the driver ridiculously hard into the concrete wall head first. The contact was devastating, smashing the front of the car and sending it into a long spin. I bet the driver wishes they kept it stock after that one. During the 2011 Monza GP2 race, Arthur Pic and Sergio Canamassas were involved in an outrageous incident that turned their race upside down, literally. The tension between the two drivers increased as they fought for position, and it ended up turning sour very quickly. As the pair approached the first Lesmo corner, Pic decided to try and overtake Canamassas on the inside. He had enough room and was about to pull off a nice overtake, but Canamassas had other ideas. He must have been daydreaming, because he didn't see Pic and drove straight into him mid-corner. It was him that came off worst though, because he suffered a serious flip as a result of the contact. Canamassas rolled over into the gravel in a heart-stopping moment, flipping through the gravel in dramatic fashion.
Trying to get past the Carlin. Is he going to try into the second Lesmo? Is he going to know he's there? Oh! Huge crash! An enormous accident for Pic and Canamassas, who rolls dramatically and thankfully has landed the right way up.
Both cars sustained major damage in the huge collision, and it's safe to say they weren't too happy with each other afterwards. The same can't be said for this Impreza though, after it took flight straight over a hedge. It came with far too much speed and ran off the road on the outside of the corner. When it hit the grass, it ran into the hedge and got launched straight into the air.
Oh yeah, Pietro.
The 2012 GP3 season served up another flying F3 car, with Connor Daly pulling the short straw that day. They were racing on the famed streets of Monaco, where the walls and fences are about as close as physically possible at every point. And Connor Daly found out the hard way why it's better to keep your car inside them, because exiting the tunnel he made contact with another car at close to 170 miles per hour. He hit the back of his rival and got launched directly into the air, completely losing control of his car. He was tossed into the fence at a horrible angle, instantly shredding parts from his car in a monumental impact. It was amazing to see the fence do its job, because he would have been going for a swim in the harbour otherwise, just like the good old F1 days in Monte Carlo.
Elias then goes to the right, so Daly moves to the left. So he goes to cover it, and Daly goes to the left, and then Saranovic then moves to the left again. Make the one move. Sorry, but for me that was more than one move.
The Canadian Grand Prix is one of those tracks that doesn't look too scary until you really think about it. The cars are flying around this high-speed track with concrete walls just inches away, waiting to claim their next victim. And unfortunately, at the 1997 Canadian Grand Prix, Olivier Panis slipped up big time. The Frenchman took his first and only F1 win at the Monaco Grand Prix a year earlier, but this tight track wasn't just as kind to him. He lost control of his Prost in the fast S's and hit the wall hard, but the second impact was worse. His car was thrown across the track and smashed into the barriers hard at a horrible angle. Panis broke both legs in the crash, a reminder that even the easiest looking corners can bite hard.
The right-hand rear wheel had a problem turning the car into the wall.
Back in 1997, Eddie Hill had this monster crash in Sonoma when competing in the NHRA. He was driving his dragster and had a good launch, but he was in for a nasty surprise. The car started breaking away at the very end of his run, and as he pulled the parachute, the whole rear of the car broke off and the front snapped in two, in one of the most bizarre accidents ever seen. It slid up the track at incredible speed, and as the rear axle was seen flipping down the tarmac on its own, Hill's cockpit smashed into the wall and flew into the gravel trap. It went airborne, flipping through the sand at huge speed and bashing him around inside the cockpit. Not the ideal way to come to a stop. The 2012 Malaysia Grand Prix was another exciting GP2 race, but one moment stood out in particular, and for good reason. Marcus Ericsson decided to go all out when defending against that year's eventual champion Davide Valsecchi, but it didn't exactly end well. The Italian attempted a move around the outside of the Swede on the high-speed corner, but regretted it later. Ericsson misjudged his defending maneuver and ran into Valsecchi. He caught his wheel at just the wrong angle and flipped his car over in a very scary incident. It tumbled over and hit the ground upside down with serious force, with Valsecchi's head barely missing the ground. His car was wrecked, but he lived to fight another day. Speaking of Japanese hero cars rolling over, this Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution fell victim too. It was coming over this blind left-hander, and by the time he realized he was going too fast, it was too late. The loose gravel didn't help either, and the car completely slid off the road. It snapped violently and dug into the ground, causing it to roll over immediately. It continued to flip several times at around 100 kilometers an hour, getting smashed up in the process and throwing debris everywhere. That's not one that'll buff out. Talking about the good old days, I had to go back to the shelf for this one, but I think you'll enjoy it. Back in 1991, Oswaldo Negri was racing in F3 at Silverstone, and while the track layout looked a bit different, the danger was still as high. Oz drove into the back of his competitor in the braking zone, lifting his car over his rivals and into the air at high speed. It instantly flipped over and rolled violently, ripping wheels and bodywork off the car. But the worst part came when he hit the tire barrier hard at a terrible angle, bringing him to a sudden stop from high speed and leaving him hanging upside down. There's no doubt that this one hurt the next morning. Now, if you think you've seen some crazy crashes already, you haven't seen anything yet, because this next one is more like something from a Hollywood blockbuster movie than a real race. But before we check it out, please drop a like on this video if you're enjoying it, and subscribe to our channel for more motorsports content just like this. Well, for the driver's sake, hopefully there's no more crashes as wild as this one, because the 2016 race at the Red Bull Ring gave us this spectacular moment. Ryan Tavita spun and was stuck in the middle of the track in a very bad spot, and to make matters worse, he sprayed dust behind him so that nobody could see his car as they drove around at 160 miles per hour. So, before he had time to even think about moving out of the way, he was hit at colossal speed by Peter Lee, was fired straight into the air. He spiraled around in the air at a huge height, and at the same time, Pedro Piquet hit Tavita and suffered a similarly massive shunt.
I know we have only 7.5 minutes plus 1 lap left. Oh my! Huge accident, a huge off. Ryan Dieter had spun, Piquet is involved, there was another car that's airborne as well, and the race is being stopped straight away. Red flag shown.
There's no doubt that this was one of the scariest crashes in modern motorsport. To be honest, in F1 it doesn't even have to be a corner, because the same can be said for the straights. At the 1989 French Grand Prix, F1 visited the Paul Ricard circuit. Yes, the same Paul Ricard before it was ruined with blue and red stripes. At the very first corner on the very first lap, Mauricio Gugelmin locked up his tires and completely lost control of his car. He hit Thierry Boutsen and Nigel Mansell, and his car turned upside down in a violent flip. 2 of the wheels broke off and it slid down the track on its roll hoop, taking Gugelmin on one of the wildest rides of his entire F1 career.
And you can see that Gugelmin has locked up his brakes, he's charging through, he hits the back of Boutsen's Williams, with Patrese already out of the race.
In the days before every moment of pre-season testing was recorded and streamed live, there would often be rumors or reports of drivers having big crashes that barely anyone saw. But in the 1990 pre-season test, this crash of Satoru Nakajima was one of the rare ones caught on camera. They were testing in Jerez, and Nakajima's car broke in one of the worst sections of track. In the high-speed corner, his rear wing suddenly detached, and without giving him any chance of saving it, it spun around immediately. He was sent flying off the track backwards at full speed, doing a 360 through the gravel trap before smashing off the barrier extremely hard. The front suspension was destroyed, and the tire barrier was busted open after this very dangerous accident.
Unfortunately, Nakajima had a nasty shock when a rear wing mounted collapsed.
3 years earlier, in 1994, Jerry Caminito had a crash in Memphis that's widely regarded as one of the scariest accidents in drag racing history, and after seeing it, it's hard to disagree. Jerry survived this vicious accident in one of his Blue Thunder cars, which has to be said, looks absolutely awesome. But things took a turn for the worse when he lost control and was fired across the track at insane speed. With no time to save it, Jerry smashed the barrier in a brutal impact, causing the car to split apart and disintegrate immediately. He was stuck in the cockpit as it got fired out onto the grass, barrel rolling, turning and flipping over a remarkable amount of times. To make matters worse, he was half thrown out of it right before it smashed off the ground. It's impossible to imagine how that last crash would have felt inside the car, but Jason Grima experienced something similar firsthand. It was 2022, and the fourth round of eliminations at the NHRA Midwest Nationals in St. Louis was taking place. Driver Jason Grima was having a good run in his popular competition eliminator car, but everything changed in a split second. He was almost at the end of his run and was traveling at incredible speed, but out of nowhere the car decided to get airborne and veer violently to the right. As the car was soaring through the air, it made heavy contact with the concrete wall before flipping over again and bursting into flames. As parts flew off his car, it came to a stop on the racetrack after all the drama, but the car was well and truly cooked. When the GP2 series changed its name to Formula 2 in 2017, it may have created a new identity, but the racing, drama, and huge crashes stayed as insane as always. Take this as an example. In the 2020 Formula 2 sprint race in Sochi, Luca Giotto and Jack Aitken were battling extremely aggressively through the first part of the lap. And when the pair got to the insane turn 3, they didn't ease off. Instead, they went side by side through the long left-hander in a daring display of bravery. But to be honest, this crazy fight was bound to end in disaster, and just moments later, Aitken lost control of his Campos machine and hit the side of Giotto, causing an absolutely monster wreck. Giotto was punted off the track at insane speed, causing a horrible side-on impact with the barrier, and Aitken was no luckier, barreling into the wall headfirst in a devastating smash.
We join this battle live, nothing between the two of them all, and that's a big crash into the wall. At turn 3, when you are just looking after the grip and you are at the mercy of your adhesion in that corner.
Somehow both got out of their car after shaking themselves off, but they definitely felt that one the next morning. Unfortunately, just 1 year after Fabio Lima's monster crash at Spa, Nigel Melker suffered a similar incident in the exact same corner. The Dutchman was coming through the infamous Rijdion corner at the top of the hill, and the car broke loose on him. Every racing driver's worst nightmare. He was shot off the track at terrifying speed, and as he headed straight towards the outside barrier, he could be seen frantically trying to save the car and get it back on track. But his efforts were no use, and a split second later, he hit the barrier at a shocking angle, wrecking his car instantly. The front lifted off the ground, debris went flying, and the car even caught fire. It was another reminder of why this corner is the most feared in all of motorsports. And now for one of the reasons why rallying in the UK always has the potential to end in disaster. the weather. It was no different in 2015 for WRC Rally Wales GP. The rain made this tricky stage even more challenging, and Thierry Neuville and his co-driver Nicolas Gilsoul found that out the hard way. Neuville clipped the inside of the road and it bounced his Hyundai sideways and into a hill on the side of the road. Thanks to the angle he hit it at, it lifted his car straight into the air and spun it in the process.
The pinball effect of the car.
As we all know by now, Spa-Francorchamps is good at producing not just good racing, but also the biggest crashes possible thanks to its high-speed nature. And 2015 was no different, with Gustavo Meneses being the unlucky one in this ferocious flip. At the end of the Kemmel Straight, the cars were approaching 180 miles per hour when Meneses suddenly made contact with a car he was battling. The force sent him flying, and before he knew it, he was completely vertical and doing a full-on backflip. He made a heavy impact with the barrier while upside down, with the railing narrowly missing his head in what could have been an even worse incident. The car skated along the barrier before sliding back into the track upside down, barely missing the other cars, and even he said he skimmed his head off the ground. It's safe to say that Spa doesn't mess around. And the drivers don't mess around either, because while F3 is known to produce incredible racing, it also has no shortage of incredible crashes. Just take this one as an example. At the Norris Ring in 2018, Dan Tickham, everyone's favourite driver, well, favourite one to hate that is, stalled his car on the grid as the lights went out. But he's not the first driver to ever do this, so I guess we'll give him a pass. But it was Amir Vaidyanathan, who definitely doesn't deserve a pass after this absolutely ridiculous piece of driving. Because he had an eternity to avoid Tickham's stalled car, but still couldn't manage to just drive around it. He smashed straight into the stationary Tickham at incredible speed, causing a devastating crash for both drivers.
One get away, and the one that did not get away and has been really clattered into, I am convinced, is the Red Bull liveried car.
I hope he headed straight for an eye test after that moronic bit of racing. Speaking of pre-season testing, Kimi Räikkönen had another heavy hit that most people forget about, and this one came in 2005 at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. Kimi crashed his new McLaren extremely hard after spinning in the high-speed right-hander of turn 11. In a violent snap, the car spun around when it hit the barrier and broke the suspension. Räikkönen suffered a badly bruised thumb in the accident and took the next day off with Pedro de la Rosa hopping into the car instead. It's never good to have a crash this big before your season even gets underway.
À deux doigts du désastre.
It's not good having a ridiculously big crash before a race either, but that's exactly what Alex Caffey did in 1991. He was practicing for the Monaco Grand Prix when he suffered this outrageous smash on the famous streets. He went almost headfirst into the wall at a bad angle, and out of nowhere, the car literally folded in on itself like it was made of paper. The wheels, bodywork, and even the complete rear half of the car detached from the survival cell in one of the most terrifying crashes the streets of Monaco have ever seen. This smash just shows how unsafe these cars truly were.
A huge accident on Saturday morning involving Alex Caffey.
There was another bad surprise for this thrill-seeking supercar owner at the TX2K22 meeting. These Nissan R35 GTRs are well known for being able to produce over 2,000 brake horsepower, and this one was no exception. On the exact same piece of tarmac as the Audi R8 I showed you a minute ago, the GTR completely lost traction and shot to the left of the track at high speed. But this time the driver tried to catch it, and sort of did, but when it avoided the wall, it just turned around and shot towards the other wall instead. It took a huge hit off the concrete, even bending the wall from the force of the impact. The car was completely wrecked, and the driver came away with nothing but a long repair bill.
Identical 60 foots nearly. Oh boy, Jensen way out of shape. Hold on to it, hold on to it. Oh, big side slap into the wall down there from Bradley Jepson.
Two California drag racers, Geneva Nash and John Richardson, got a bit too close for comfort in this surreal smash in 2023. They were racing in the third round of top dragster eliminations at Pomona and made it about halfway through the run before complete chaos unfolded. Nash lost control of her dragster and began swerving across the track, making it fully into Richardson's lane. She narrowly missed him twice before smashing into him and flipping his car over instantly. The speed the cars rolled was shocking, and Nash barrel rolled numerous times up the track with debris flying everywhere. Both were taken to hospital, but somehow missed out on any injuries in this huge wreck. As we know by now, this series is never short of surprises, and the 2011 season was no exception, saving the most devastating crash of the whole season for the very last race. As they lined up on the grid in Abu Dhabi for the last time that season, the fully packed field was sure to bring excitement to the Yas Marina track, but nobody predicted what would happen next. As the lights went out, the fourth-place qualifier Danny Kloss stalled on the grid, and the chance of every car behind him avoiding him was pretty slim. Luis Reixa was coming from the back and had reached extremely high speed already. When trying to navigate the other drivers, he veered left to avoid Jolyon Palmer, but didn't see Kloss and smashed straight into him at full speed. The impact was horrific and sent Kloss flying into the air, hitting the metal barrier and spreading debris everywhere.
Stalled car. Oh my goodness, that was an absolutely monumental shunt. You see him come swerving across to the left. Oh my word.
3 cars in total got wrecked, but somehow they all avoided serious injury in this horror hit. The fan favourite Istanbul Park always delivers some dramatic racing, but in 2011's GP2 race it all got a bit too dramatic for Julian Leal and Davide Rigon. The two were battling fiercely, with Rigon trying his best to get past Leal, who was putting on a great showcase in defensive driving, but when they got onto the main straight, everything changed. Rigon was right behind Leal as they drove flat out across the line and pulled out to make the overtake on Leal, but his attempt was absolutely terrible. He drove straight into the back of Leal, sending the young Colombian sideways into the concrete pit wall at well over 150 miles per hour. The impact was devastating, and Leal's car bounced back across the track as it slid out of control, shedding bodywork across the tarmac. Rigon hit the wall too, but nothing like as hard as his rival. As Leal's car came to a rest, he tried to climb out, but it was obvious that he was in a bit of trouble. The suspension came through the cockpit in the smash, hit his leg, and broke his ankle. Talk about a bad day in the office. And while we're talking about crazy bits of racing, this moment in the 2022 sprint race at Spa crossed the line too. This time it was Oliver Goethe and Zane Maloney who found the wall in the biggest way possible. Maloney was racing Goethe hard around one of the highest speed corners on the entire track, which is fine if you give the other guy enough space. But they must have forgotten about that part, because they banged wheels and sent each other straight into the gravel. The two hit the wall at incredible speed, with Maloney hitting it almost head first and flipping over after a mega impact with the barrier, destroying his car in the process. We're heading back to the Macau Grand Prix for this next crash, courtesy of the 2014 edition of the F3 Classic. The massive grid of cars made it through the first corner, but that was about as far as most of them got. The third and fourth place drivers ran each other into the wall on the outside of turn 2, smacking the wall and bouncing back onto the track. It blocked half the road and caused complete chaos for the whole pack behind them, creating a massive pileup. One of the cars hit it at a huge speed and got launched over the tyre barrier and into the fence in a very dangerous accident. Like Jolyon Palmer said, you have to be alert on a street circuit. It's back to the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve for this next one, when the menacing Montreal track served up this eerie wreck. Pedro Diniz was driving his Sauber Patronus in FP1 when he suddenly lost control coming into turn 1. He spun and hit the entry curb, launching his car straight into the air and across the runoff. It bounced across the gravel before smashing into the tyre barrier head-on at high speed. The Brazilian was spun around and thrown back onto the track for good measure, with his car well and truly out of action. Brendan Hartley continues to have a brilliant career in sports car racing, but his stint in F1 didn't live up to expectations. He had a couple of big crashes during his 25-race career, and this was one of them. During free practice 3 for the 2018 British Grand Prix, Hartley suffered this absolutely huge wreck. The front left suspension failed on his Toro Rosso, causing his car to spiral out of control while approaching top speed. It shot across the gravel trap and hit the ground awkwardly, bouncing it up into the air. This caused it to smash into the barrier hard at a nasty angle, and the red flag came out straight away.
Oh, he's gone off! And a big crash there for the Toro Rosso.
A similar incident happened in 2007 when John Force and Kenny Bernstein had an unforgettable coming together in Dallas. They were racing their funny cars at the Texas Motorplex in round 2 and almost made it to the end of their run smoothly, but when Force pulled his parachute, all hell broke loose. The rear end of his car exploded, sending him hard into Bernstein's lane. He smashed into the side of him and pushed him into the wall at a disturbing angle, with both cars hitting the concrete extremely hard. They broke into pieces and slid hundreds of feet up the track before coming to a stop. John suffered minor injuries, but was lucky to survive this insane accident, while Kenny retired from drag racing again at the end of the year.
Well, John was a little late. And John, big crash. John has a problem with his car. He comes across, he hits Bernstein. Both cars continue on. John's car is torn well up.
American drag racer and 8-time NHRA champion Tony Schumacher is no stranger to winning, but unfortunately, he's no stranger to crashing either, especially at Memphis. The legendary racer had 2 of the biggest accidents of his entire career in the same place, just 3 years apart. First up is his horrific crash from the year 2000, where he hit the wall at 320 miles per hour. That's over 510 kilometers per hour. The car snapped to the right, and before he knew it, he hit the concrete wall and was barrel rolling violently on the grass. The car was breaking up more and more with each hit, and the cockpit was thrown an outrageous distance with him trapped inside. It's hard to see how a human can survive that, but Tony did and returned for more. When he returned for more though, he would have been hoping it was more winning and not more crashing. But just 3 years later, he was the victim of this vicious accident. In the Mid-South Nationals qualifying, he was having a decent run against the other legendary driver, Larry Dixon. Dixon's car jumped off the ground, and he lifted off the throttle to avoid crashing, but Schumacher kept his foot in, and it didn't end well. His car lost control at tremendous speed, creating the shocking scene where his car literally exploded and flew straight into the air. It flipped mid-air for good measure, and by the time he smashed off the ground hard, his car was already broken into a million pieces. Debris was scattered everywhere in what was honestly one of the most terrifying crashes in drag racing history.
Tony Schumacher in the top fuel class. At 300 miles an hour, his rail simply breaks in half. Tony Schumacher goes flying in the air. Miraculously, he suffered a minor sprained knee.
The 2006 GP2 round at Valencia was a relatively uneventful one for Irishman Adam Carroll, but that was until this happened. Driving for Racing Engineering, he was fighting the Campos racing car of Adrian Valles in an intense and close battle, but the two got a little bit too close for comfort when Carroll drove straight into the back of the Spaniard at his home race. Out of nowhere, Carroll's car was launched into the air, flying straight over Valles' car, creating an unbelievable scene. It smashed off the ground, breaking the front suspension, but when it got to the gravel trap, things got even worse.
And
there.
Oh, well,
I think Adam was just taken by surprise just how slow Valles was there.
Valles maybe a little earlier on the brakes. That's the impact. Oh, that is a phenomenal picture.
Let's stay in Spain for a moment, as Antonio Giovinazzi, or the Italian Jesus as he used to be known, was driving for Prima Racing during the 2016 Barcelona GP2 weekend, when he had this brutal bang off the barrier. He was attempting an overtake on rival Sean Gelael of Campos Racing, but Gelael didn't exactly give him much space to get the move done. Gelael pushed the Italian off the track, and with nowhere to go, Giovinazzi drove into the grass and made contact with Gelael's car on one of the quickest points of the circuit. It flew into the air, giving the 2023 Le Mans winner no time to slow down at all. He barreled at top speed towards the barrier and hit it at crazy speed side on in a very painful looking impact. He was shaken up as he made his way out of his car, but managed to escape this one without any injuries. But it's not just a street circuit you have to be alert on, because even the most unassuming pieces of racetrack can be absolutely deadly. And this was proven in the F3 race at Alton Park in 2016, when we witnessed one of the most shocking crashes in all of motorsports history. It was the unfortunate Ami Avadian Narton again, who was attempting a perfectly safe overtake on a competitor on the straight, but as they approached a kink in the road, he got squeezed by his rival and lost control of his car. It dug into the grass and was instantly sent airborne as if it had been catapulted into the sky. It reached a ridiculous height, twisting and turning in midair until crashing back down to earth with a massive impact. This truly terrifying crash is a great reminder to always check your mirrors. Now let's head down under for this mental piece of F3 action in Melbourne, where Graham Holmes got a bit more action than he signed up for. This race in 2010 saw Holmes battling competitor John Boothman side by side through a high-speed section, and when they reached a flat-out kink in the road, they found out that 2 into 1 doesn't go. Holmes was forced over a curb at 200 kilometers an hour, and as he hit it, it lifted the front of his car completely off the ground. He went completely vertical as his car soared through the air, smashing the fence hard at a brutal angle. He slid down the guardrail and back onto the track upside down. Not a good day at the office. Pedro Diniz is back for a second entry on the list, and this time it happened on German soil. F1 was visiting the Nürburgring, and after the cars were sitting on the grid for almost 40 seconds in a delayed start, the lights finally went out. This probably had all the drivers on edge, culminating in a crash just after turn 1. Pedro Diniz tried to go around a group of cars that slowed down coming out of the corner, but when he did, Wurz clipped the back of his car, and that was the beginning of the end. His Sauber Patronus got launched into the air and flipped over onto its roll hoop. Judging by the terrifying state of the car though, it looks like the only thing the roll hoop did was break. When the car got turned the right way up, it was clear that the roll hoop did snap off, but somehow Diniz survived the crash.
Benetton goes across and clips the back of Diniz as he's minding his own business, going around the outside.
Long before the flashy streets of Vegas or the fake marina at the Miami Grand Prix, F1 was racing in the US around the streets of Phoenix, Arizona. But the 1991 race turned into one to forget for Riccardo Patrese and Roberto Moreno. Patrese was running in a solid second place, but unfortunately his gearbox locked up and caused him to spin. What's even worse is that the car stopped at the exit of a corner and he couldn't get it going again. A couple of cars managed to avoid him, but Roberto Moreno in 4th place couldn't do the same. He smashed into the stalled Patrese and broke the suspension and front wing off both cars in a very scary incident for both drivers. Definitely not the best way to start your season.
Roberto Moreno in 4th place, couldn't avoid him.
World champion Brittany Force was racing in Pomona in 2018 when her car dramatically caught fire and flipped over. Force was racing Terry Haddock in the first round of the eliminations at the Lucas Oil Winter Nationals when things turned dark pretty quickly. Her 11,000 brake horsepower Monster Energy dragster suddenly lost control during the pass and smashed straight into the concrete wall. It flipped onto its side and slid across the track, hitting the other wall and breaking the entire front of her car off. Just imagine how terrifying that would be from inside the cockpit.
Like that.
Whoa!
Oh, hang on, Brittany! Brittany's car smokes the tires, gets sideways, crosses the center line, pancaked the left wall, came back across the track,
and it has come to a stop down at the far end.
Chris Thorne was racing at the Strip at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and let's just say his gamble didn't exactly pay off. It was in the NHRA Pro Mod eliminations at the Nevada Nationals in 2023, and Thorne was taken for a wild ride during the very first round. His car started pulling towards the center line, and at that point, Thorne knew it was going to get ugly. It suddenly snapped to the left and smashed the wall head first at an almighty speed in a very nasty impact. It flipped over instantly and spun around in the air with the front and back of the car breaking off, sending debris everywhere. Now coming your way is not one, but two absolutely mega crashes from the same driver at the exact same track. Daniel De Jong is the driver in question, and the track, well, that would be none other than Spa, of course. The first of his heavy hits came in 2013 when he was driving for MP Motorsport, and to be honest, it was pretty self-inflicted. While approaching the daunting Eau Rouge corner completely flat out, he was racing Rio Haryanto side by side. Rio thought that De Jong would give him room to continue the fight through the corner, but De Jong, well, he had other ideas. He cut Haryanto off, and his rear tire hit Haryanto's front wing, puncturing it instantly. A split second later, De Jong found himself heading straight towards the barrier at outrageous speed. He collided with the wall in a massive shunt, wrecking the front and back of his car in the process. It was sheer luck that neither driver was injured in this crazy bit of racing. And as promised, here's De Jong serving as the double, as he had another wicked crash in the feature race just 2 years later. This time though, things went a lot worse. He was fighting a guy that you might have heard of called Pierre Gasly, and the pair were approaching the heart-stopping Blanchimont corner on the limit of their machinery, approaching 200 miles per hour. And of course, they're racing drivers, so neither of them were going to lift. But unfortunately for De Jong, Gasly must have been looking at his phone or something, because he moved across the track and drove straight into the side of him in a completely crazy move. De Jong's car was lifted into the air and completely out of his control, sending him headfirst into the barrier at ridiculous speed. The impact was shocking, as his car was buried deep in the tires, completely destroyed.
Oh my word! A huge impact into the tyre barrier there. We panned away.
That was going to be a safety car, I'm certain of that. That was a huge shunt. You do not want to be having that right there.
Another driver who was caught out in a high-speed corner was Enzo Bortoleto during his race in the UK. The F3 grid took on the Rockingham track in 2016, and this young Brazilian's race got turned upside down. Quite literally. He was battling a rival side by side, and the two cars came together, flipping Bortoleto into the air. His car barrel rolled, hit the ground, and did 2 front flips at huge speed, crashing off the ground and completely smashing his car. These F3 cars sure do love flipping out of control.
Looking for a way past was Tarun ready, and a huge off there at Chapman Curve. Upside down and in the gravel. And that, I fear, is going to bring out the red flag. The car that's off, incidentally, is that of Enzo Bortoleto.
The most common place for crashes at Spa are at the famous corners like Eau Rouge and Blanchimont, but they can happen at the very first corner too. Just check out this F3 race in 2010. The pack barely got through La Source before they all started running wide and smashing into each other. These two drivers made contact in an extremely hard side impact, with one car flying over the other, breaking its wing and wrecking both cars. Riccardo Patrese was in the wars again, this time at the British Grand Prix in 1989. He was coming absolutely flat out towards the high-speed right-hander, and from inside the cockpit, everything seemed to be under control. But from the outside, smoke could be seen shooting out the back of his Williams. It dropped oil onto his rear tires, so when he turned in, the grip obviously wasn't there. It shot his car around immediately, spinning him off the track. When he hit the gravel, it was like he hit a ramp, and his car car went airborne straight away. Talk about bad design. It launched him into the tyre barrier extremely violently, completely wrecking his car in the process. That's not how Williams would have liked their home race weekend to go.
He has a hold radiator, the fluid gets onto the rear wheels, and he spins round and into the club tyre barrier.
Alessandro Zanardi, or as he's better known, Alex Zanardi, was well known for his fearless driving style, often pulling off moves that seemed impossible. Unfortunately, he was involved in many large accidents in his career, which are well documented. But the one that you mightn't have seen before was his monster shunt from the weekend of the 1993 Belgian Grand Prix. During practice at Spa-Francorchamps, Zanardi was driving completely on the limit through the treacherous Eau Rouge, attempting to find the limits of his Team Lotus 107. But it became clear pretty quickly that he was actually driving past the car's limit, because out of nowhere he lost control and flew off the track, smashing the outside wall head-on at around 150 miles per hour. The massive impact caused his car to shatter, erupt in flames, and spin violently as it broke into pieces along the racetrack. It then landed in the gravel trap on the other side of the track, and when other drivers tried to avoid the debris, it caused Senna to crash too. Zanardi was sidelined for 9 months after this horrific crash, but luckily recovered and went back to racing.
This was a massive shunt.
It was the biggest shunt I've seen all year. Zanardi, I can't imagine what speed he hit the barrier virtually head-on.
Next on the list is a man who needs no introduction. But before Max Verstappen was the 3-time world champion he is today, he was fighting it out in the midfield in a Toro Rosso. While driving for the team in 2015 as a 17-year-old, he had this huge crash on the streets of Monaco. He was chasing Romain Grosjean in his Lotus, and when he got close to him on the main straight, he attempted the overtake. But a bit of misjudgment ended up very costly for the young Dutchman. He absolutely sent it on Grosjean, but instead of going around him, he got his braking wrong and plowed into the back of his Lotus instead. It sent him headfirst into the barrier at Sainte-Devote at extremely high speed in a seriously scary smash. It's crazy to think you could just walk away from a crash this big, but thankfully he did.
And Verstappen goes straight into the barrier at Sainte-Devote.
Clay Millican was a fan favourite when he showed up to the Milan dragway in 2005. The main reason for this was because the top fuel dragster he was driving was sponsored by the Dukes of Hazzard, and his car was painted in that famous orange livery. Clay was just a good old boy, never meaning no harm, but unluckily for him, his car wasn't feeling the same towards him. Moments after he took off, the front of his car blew up into the air and flipped over in the biggest way possible, landing him on his roof. He flew up the track like this at around 200 miles per hour and crossed the finish line upside down, on his roof, traveling backwards. At the 2003 Super Nationals in Englishtown, New Jersey, Brandon Bernstein suffered the biggest crash in his entire career. About halfway through the pass in his top fuel dragster, Brandon's car went out of control when he smoked the tires just a bit too much. He overcorrected the steering, and before he knew it, his car began swerving uncontrollably across the track. It jolted violently to the left, flipped onto its side, and hit the wall extremely hard at a very scary angle, sending all the energy into the cockpit where Bernstein was sitting. Remember, these cars have carbon fiber seats with no padding at all, so it would have felt far from pleasant.
Kenny Bernstein won in the Budweiser King in the first round today. Son Brandon went for the ride of his life. The car got out of control, hit the wall hard. Brandon up and over, and from that moment on, everyone was holding their breath.
How about another double disaster for another unfortunate upcomer? You might remember Fabio Lima from the second crash in this video and his crazy shunt at Spa. Well, this time he was having a bad day in Istanbul when his race took a turn for the worst, and a turn upside down, I might add. The start of the 2011 GP2 race at Istanbul Park was completely hectic, with all the drivers fighting extremely closely for position through the winding first section of the racetrack. Now that's a recipe for disaster. As the pack tightened, Lima found himself getting squeezed, and before he knew it, chaos was unfolding around him. Cars were spinning off, and he got fired up into the air. His car took off like a jet, barrel rolling mid-air across the racetrack in an unbelievably dangerous crash. He barely missed the other cars before viciously rolling again, taking heavy impact on the way down. Safe to say, he won't be forgetting that race too quickly. Certain drivers often have an affinity with certain tracks. Maybe their cars are always fast there. Perhaps the track suits their racing style, and sometimes they just seem to get lucky when they race there. But for Nicholas Latifi and the Yas Marina circuit in Abu Dhabi, it's the complete opposite. Way before his moment at the end of the 2021 F1 race there, let's not bring that up again, he was racing on the same track in 2018 during his Formula 2 days. At the start of the race, he stalled from third on the grid and was left as a sitting duck, hoping that every other driver would see his car and avoid hitting him, but unfortunately, things didn't work out that way. Latifi was hit by Arjun Mini at full speed in a massive shunt, taking the whole side off Latifi's car and punting it up the track in a very scary incident. But luck was on Latifi's side as he walked away unscathed. Another strange start happened the same year at Silverstone, when these two drivers came together before the lights even went out. The drivers were starting their warm-up lap when Felipe Nasr stalled on the grid and was left as a sitting duck. Everyone else managed to avoid Nasr, but Manisha Idafar was coming at high speed and must have been looking around him at the scenery, because he drove into the back of Nasr in a completely ridiculous move. He smashed Nasr's car hard, lifting it into the air and breaking its rear wing and his own front wing in the process. Before his F1 days, Alexander Albon came up through the ranks and was racing in F3 in 2016, and in the Abu Dhabi round, he was shaken up by this bad impact. While going down the back straight, Albon was hit from behind and started to lose control straight away. His car veered off the track at 150 miles per hour and he hit the barrier hard. As he smashed into the wall head first, his car spun around and got destroyed as it made contact with the barrier yet again in a secondary impact.
Hughes, le Britannique de Dams. Attention derrière, un énorme accident.
Next up is a similar story for Lewis Hamilton, because before he had 7 world titles to his name, he suffered a monumental crash in his debut year too. The Brit was racing for McLaren at the Nürburgring in 2007 and was pushing hard while approaching the S's in qualifying. But at the worst possible moment, his front right tyre failed and he lost control of his car, sending him straight off the track. As his McLaren bounced across the gravel, it went airborne and was launched straight into the barrier at extremely high speed and a horrible angle. It was clear that he was in pain after the smash and was taken away in the ambulance, but luckily suffered no injuries. We're staying in Germany for this next one, albeit it's back to the 90s. The most famous crash of Eric Comas's career was the one at Spa in '92, when Ayrton Senna was credited with saving his life by stopping on the track and turning off Comas's engine. But a year earlier, Comas suffered this huge hit during qualifying for the 1991 German GP. The Frenchman crashed his Ligier Lamborghini extremely hard into the tyre barrier, throwing tyres all across the track. His Ligier flipped over, caught fire, and ripped the whole right side off the car in the process. The session was stopped and the ambulance arrived on the scene after this very nasty shunt.
Just a little on the left, and then I spun and I crashed, but I don't know exactly why.
Another driver who had an unfortunate flip was none other than Pat Dakin, who went on this death-defying ride back in 1998. He was racing in Heartland Park Topeka, as it was known then, in Kansas, when his Top Fuel dragster suffered this almighty blowover. He lost the front end and the car immediately flipped into the air in a blink of an eye, and and Pat was left wondering which way was up and which way was down. The rear wheels came off as it flipped through the air, before dramatically landing back on the ground and smashing awkwardly off the concrete wall. The impact ripped the car in two, sending parts flying everywhere as flames erupted from the wreckage. It was a brutal hit that involved a little bit of everything bad. And while we're on the page of top fuel dragsters getting airborne, here's another example, courtesy of the legendary Larry Dixon. He experienced this breathtaking crash in 2015 when racing in the first qualifying session at the NHRA Gator Nationals in Gainesville. Moments after starting his pass, the front of his car split in two out of nowhere and sent him completely vertically in a very strange accident. The car then flipped and twisted midair before crashing off the tarmac and bouncing into the concrete wall twice. The front axle of his car was left spinning on the track, hundreds of feet behind him, as debris was scattered everywhere it could possibly go.
Whoa! Larry crashes hard right at the finish line. Both cars were kind of hunting towards the center. You can see that Doug's car was moving over there.
And speaking of huge hits in the famous streets, they don't get much scarier than this one. When the championship leader Romain Grosjean came to Monaco in 2009, he would have been hoping to win big and extend his championship lead, but in a split second, everything went wrong. While approaching the turn 12 corner Tabac, Grosjean was feeling optimistic, to put it kindly, and decided to try an overtake on the car ahead. What could go wrong? He ran into the rear of the car ahead, launching the front of his car into the air and out of control. He smashed the wall at an almighty speed as his car mounted the crash barrier, leaving him looking up at the sky as his car lay beached.
Oh, and crowd, look at that! Romain Grosjean gets it all wrong, and that was unbelievable, and that's the accident that we've been waiting for so many years, and he mounted the barrier, and let's hope that Romain Grosjean, the championship leader, is going to be okay. He's in the cockpit.
Luckily for him, he must have hit the wall at just the right angle to avoid injury, as he somehow walked away from this unbelievable shunt. The Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya can produce some of the wildest racing, especially in Formula 2, thanks to its unique layout and overtaking opportunities. But someone should have told these guys in 2013 that not every corner is a passing opportunity, as this one went horribly wrong. The first race of the 2013 GP2 weekend in Barcelona saw Nathanael Berton involved in one of the most shocking flips in recent history. He was fighting fiercely with two other cars, and as the group approached the turn 10 corner La Caixa, things took a turn for the worst. As Berton tried to make his mind up about whether to go left or right, he ended up locking up his tires and going straight on instead. And not only did he go straight on, but he also went straight over the other two cars, damaging them and flipping himself in the process. His car caught crazy air, and he was extremely lucky not to roll over fully. Instead, he took a huge hit as his car smashed off the ground. That isn't one he'll forget easily. Back to Spa for this next crash, and it's one of the worst in recent memory from the brutal Belgian track. Driver Konstantin Terestchenko was making his debut, and it didn't exactly go smoothly for the 20-year-old Russian. At the last chance, it looked like he completely forgot to brake and went sailing off the track. He hit the curb and it launched him into the air, barely knocking off any speed in the process. He floated through the air at a huge height, and his car came crashing down on its side, instantly rolling over, breaking up and bursting into flames. Talk about a baptism of fire for the rookie. This 2013 crash was similarly wild and involved Finnish driver Patrick Kujala, who was involved in a major crash at Silverstone. He misjudged how fast his rival David Fumanelli was driving and ran straight into the back of him, causing his Koiranen car to flip over the top of Fumanelli in a split second. The car turned into a vicious roll and smashed off the ground before rolling over a second time and ending up in the wall. The 2012 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix saw Kimi Raikkonen's first win of the year and also his first with his new team Lotus, but elsewhere in the race, chaos was breaking out between two other drivers. Nico Rosberg was involved in a very scary moment at Yas Marina as he collided with Narain Karthikeyan. The German was chasing Kartikeyan through the final sector, but got a bit too close for comfort and drove straight into the back of him. His Mercedes was launched into the air with all four wheels off the ground and flew straight over Kartikeyan's HRT. It smashed both cars in the process, and Rosberg suffered another huge hit when his Merc landed back on the ground and slid into the barrier at high speed.
A spectacular accident and a high-speed impact for the German.
Another one of the crazy crashes from the turbo hybrid era came in 2015 after Daniil Kvyat got it all wrong. The Russian was driving for Red Bull and was on the limit during Q3 in qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix. While on the run-up to the hairpin, he dropped a wheel onto the grass, but that was all it took to cause one of the biggest crashes of his racing career. The Red Bull veered wildly out of control and hit the barrier at over 140 miles per hour. When it made contact, it spun around violently, dug into the gravel, and flipped over. The wheels and tethers even came off from the downright force of the crash, and the car was absolutely wrecked. Unfortunately for him, he had no one to blame but himself.
Oh, he got on the grass on the way in.
The Gainesville track also had it out for Al Hoffman in 1997 when it served up this highlight reel crash. He was participating against Mark Oswald in the funny car final, but there was nothing funny about what happened when he reached the end of his pass. The car blew up seemingly out of nowhere and went up in a fireball in a split second. He pulled his parachute, but the car would just not slow down, sending him straight into the catch fencing in a ball of flames. He had a horrific crash over the wall as it tore up his car, and there wasn't much left of it other than the roll cage that was protecting him. But he did go out in a blaze of glory, literally, as he still won the race. But check this one out. One of the strangest drag racing moments ever happened in Brainerd in 2014, when not one car crashed, but two, and they didn't even hit each other. See, when Monty Green and Don Kritsky were racing each other, neither driver came out unscathed. Monty Green lost control of his car shortly after starting his pass and started wobbling across the track. The car eventually flipped over and barrel rolled, smashing it in the process. And almost straight away after he crashed, Don Kritsky decided to do the same, slapping the outside wall hard in a big side impact. His car then flipped over, hit the wall, barrel rolled, broke into two, and went on fire for good measure. What a race.
This is Monty Green, who gets sideways first. He tips it over. This looks very, very bad, but watch Mr. Kritsky.
Don Kritsky gets into the wall, comes around, knocked the fuel line off of it, and that started a raging inferno.
We all know how dangerous a stalled car on the grid can be, but few accidents demonstrate the true danger as much as this shocking shunt did in 2021. When F2 visited the high-speed Jeddah Corniche circuit in 2021, the race start turned into a nightmare for drivers Enzo Fittipaldi and Theo Pourchaire. The Frenchman stalled from third of the grid, and there just wasn't enough time for Fittipaldi to avoid his car. Enzo drove right into Theo's stalled car at full speed, causing an outrageous impact for both drivers and completely wrecking both cars. Both were taken to hospital, with Fittipaldi fracturing his right heel and Pourchaire managing to escape without injury. Talk about chaos. Nothing excites quite like a qualifying session around the streets of Monte Carlo. Cars going flat out, and when it goes wrong, it goes badly wrong. Take Jake Hughes in 2022 as an example. The Brit was right on the edge of grip, pushing as hard as he possibly could with 1 minute remaining in qualifying. He was on a decent lap, but that was until he got to the famous swimming pool section, where his hopes of a top time started to sink. Hughes went in too deep and smashed into the apex, launching his car straight into the air at ludicrous speed. He hit the inside wall in a crash that would be huge on its own, and was then sent straight into the outside wall. The impact was shocking, with the side-on hit completely wrecking his car. Bodywork was ripped from the car and thrown across the track, in what was one of the most dramatic Monaco crashes in recent memory. When F3 visited Hungary in 2011, Luciano Bacchetta didn't even make it through practice before having this monster crash in the first half of the lap. He lost control of his car and went off the track at high speed, straight into the barrier. As he hit it, his car flew upwards and twisted midair, landing back onto the barrier upside down and almost landing on his head. As the marshals ducked for cover, the car barrel rolled twice more before coming to a rest upside down in a less than ideal place. Giuliano Alesi, yes, the son of the ex-Ferrari F1 driver Jean Alesi, was racing at the Red Bull Ring in 2016 when he suffered this mega head-on crash in practice. As he was approaching turn 1, his brakes failed and he was sent straight on at the top speed of almost 180 miles per hour. He had no choice but to hit the tyre barrier headfirst, causing a devastating crash for the young Frenchman as the car got buried in the tyres momentarily.
He's just, he's off the road! Huge crash for Alesi, who had just posted the second fastest time.
It registered 46G and he had to withdraw from the rest of the weekend. It was definitely one of the hardest hits that corner has ever seen. Michael Schumacher had a trip through the gravel as well at the Imola Grand Prix in 1995. The previous year at this track saw the darkest weekend in F1 history, but this year featured a huge crash for F1's biggest driver too. Schumacher lost control of his Benetton and spun out onto the grass, breaking the front wheel off the concrete wall. He hit a gap in the grass and it fired his car into the air, through the gravel and straight into the barriers backwards. The car spun around and smashed the barrier a second time, throwing debris absolutely everywhere. Thankfully though, the safer cars in '95 meant Schumacher was able to walk away from this scary shunt. We have something a bit different. It's a top fuel dragster versus a funny car, in what appeared to be a strange matchup to say the least. Rick Gorsey in his funny car was taking on Debbie Reed in her top fuel dragster in Willowbank Raceway's New Year series. But it turned sour pretty quickly for Debbie Reed, because near the end of her run, she lost control of her car and veered into the wall, causing a huge hit. But it got worse as the car split in two, shot across the track and hit the other wall. It caught fire, slid down the track, and without losing much speed at all, rolled over violently in the grass runoff area. She then hit yet another concrete wall at the end of the strip, creating one of the most intense crashes in drag racing history. But just before we go, here's a bonus crash as my way of saying thanks for all your support, and it might just be the craziest one on the entire list. Phil Lamartina was subjected to this horrendous crash in June 2015 at Willowbank Raceway in Queensland, Australia. He was racing in Futch's Winter Nationals drag meet, and it looked like he got a great start off the line. But just moments later, the car began to move around, and out of nowhere, the front of his car completely snapped off, leaving him with no control at all. It folded and shot him into the air, breaking in two and sending him literally flying down the track at shocking speed into the concrete wall. It's not one that he'll forget anytime soon. Théo Pourchaire was on the unfortunate end of the stick again, this time in the 2022 Monza feature race. The pack managed to get through the famous first chicane without issue, which is a miracle in itself, but things quickly unfolded after that. Pourchaire hit Boschung coming out of turn 2, which started a chain reaction of crashes that kept getting worse and worse. Boschung hit the wall hard and Pourchaire spun, who then got hit not once but twice. He got T-boned with an extremely hard impact, spinning his car around on the track, such was the force of the hit. Luckily, the car did its job and kept the Frenchman safe, but he definitely would have been sore after that one.
Still scrapping there, there's going to be a spin in the background, into the wall goes Boschung, and it's Théo Pourchaire, hit a couple of times, Luca Ghiotto and Ollie Caldwell in that as well. That will be a safety car.
And seeing as I'm feeling generous today, here is a bonus crash before we wrap up the video. This mental moment came from the 2009 GP2 race at Portugal's Portimão circuit. Vitaly Petrov stalled instantly at the start and was seen frantically waving his hands in the air to alert race control, hoping they would stop the race before he got hit. But unfortunately for him, his plan didn't work, as the very last car on the grid didn't see him in time. He got driven into by Michael Herc at full speed, hitting the rear of his car unbelievably hard, causing an immense crash. Debris was sent flying everywhere, and the two wrecked cars were left sitting on the grid in pieces. The 2013 race in Hungary also saw a massive hit for Emanuele Zonzini and Luis Sasilva when they came together coming out of turn 1. Sasilva got hit by Zonzini and ran over the top of his car as they both lost control. His car rolled over instantly and almost hit Zonzini's head in an extremely close call, before landing back on the track with a big impact. But that's enough carnage for today. Let me know in the comments which crash you thought was the worst, and let us know if we missed any. Please drop a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any videos in the future. This was Racers Reverie. See you next time.